Welcome back to the garden stage and this conversation, which is going to be in English. We're going to talk about different countries and different solutions and international comparison of AI strategies, because at this point, of course, we have learned that AI is transforming higher education everywhere, but not necessarily in the same way. And so we want to look at international perspectives and see what higher education institutions in German-speaking countries can learn from them. So really concretely, which infrastructures, which governance models, which assessment practices, which support structures can travel to our context? And what could institutions like yours here realistically try out? And we have the best possible panel for this. Philipp Schmidt was already on stage earlier today, is the VP for Technology Innovation at Axim Collaborative. Maybe you can say a little bit about that later. A nonprofit founded by MIT and Harvard to expand access to teaching and learning. He previously led digital learning at the MIT Media Lab and has worked for many years at the intersections of open education, online learning, and institutional innovation in all ways. Yeah. Johannes Schleiss, next to me, is program manager for AI in education at SURF in the Netherlands. As part of the NPulse digitalization program, he develops strategies for the future of education with AI and data, and he helps shape SURF's international work in that field. And then Jannica Budde in the middle is Senior Project Manager at the Hochschulforum Digitalisierung and works at the Center for Higher Education, CHE. Her work focuses on strategy development for higher education institutions, including peer-to-peer consulting, transfer and leadership development, digital assessments, curriculum development, and the HFD 360 monitor, which many of you might know. It's a biannual analysis of the state of digitalization in teaching and learning across German universities. And we thought we would give you the lay of the land a little bit by looking back 3 years. So in the past 3 years, what were the main trends and developments? How has AI implementation in higher ed evolved from first experimentation, from these first policies that we were negotiating toward infrastructure, governance, and really curricular integration? And where do we stand today? Jannica, do you want to, from your perspective, just say what happened from your perspective in the last 3 years and where are we today?
Yeah, in Germany, I think, I don't have to tell you, of course, there was a shock about assessment of academic integrity. But I think German universities kind of realized quite quickly we can't keep AI out of the university. And so I think the focus shifted to 2 things. First, infrastructure or access to AI Gen AI tools, LMM, simply to, as a pragmatic way to deal with this, with the reality that students, but also faculty were using AIs, and to make it more secure, to more fair, more equal. There's this idea, and I think it's still a work in progress, to offer a good infrastructure, and all this debate about digital sovereignty, about open access, about European solutions is part of this aim of this strategy. The second is AI literacy, and to foster competencies in this field for students, but also faculty, but also staff, administrative staff. And this is basically also my focus in my work. And I think a lot of universities, we saw last year in our AI monitor, we saw that about 84% of all universities in our sample had some kind of workshop or self-learning course for students. So we're still in the phase where it's an add-on, but there is some movement towards curriculum integration. Yeah, so that is these 2 main foci, I think. And maybe a little third trend we're right now trying to investigate is about strategically or using AI in learning processes, like AI and learning analytics, AI and specialized chatbots for learning, for counseling, and this all. So, yeah, I can maybe tell you about it later in the year.
Thank you for the lay of the land when it comes to Germany. And what about the Netherlands, Johannes?
So I think it's a quite similar picture in the first place, that I think the first reaction was, oh, we need equal access to tools. And what we see in the Netherlands is that in the first instance, the institutions reacted quite differently to it. So we have examples that go with procurement or partnership with private companies. So we have, for example, the first institution that has a partnership with Claude in Europe, that is in the Netherlands, Breda University. And others are more looking at different types of tools, so not having one kind of procurement or one person that is bringing the tools, but a suite of tools. And I think this is like currently partly solved, I would say, but at the same time, we, from a SURF perspective, SURF is a cooperation of all the institutions, and we do also service provision for all the institutions. And currently we are basically building AI services for all the institutions that are gonna be rolled out, or they're already in the rollout, and from 27, basically everyone will have access to like a general EduGen AI platform, which is kind of for now a chat interface, which is targeted in the future also more to educational use cases. So this is kind of what's happening around the tools and this process. I don't think that a national solution will solve everything. I think the institutions still look a bit on what do we need. I think the second pattern that I'm seeing is really a shift from experimentation, small kind of projects, excited people trying out stuff, to a more integrated strategic layer. So there's like now, I feel in almost all the institutions, some sort of governance building up. This takes really different shapes. So you might have something like a AI program manager that tries to kind of manage that whole consistency through the institution. You might also have more something like a AI desk that is kind of a central information point, or we also see really kind of integrated frameworks that are being developed to really come from the fragmentation to a more control. So it's like really a shift from, oh, we want to get back control. It's also sometimes a compliance perspective, but that's another. And I think that the last thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of the discussions are still on a level that we are looking into optimizing the current system. So we are trying to improve how we do, I don't know, assessment, but we are not rethinking what do we actually want to achieve with education. And this is really still a discussion, and we might come to that now, but I think this is where we not yet are.
Because strategy does not work without a vision, right? So the whole strategy flows from vision, and then it's structure, culture, all the levels down, right?
Yes, and I think what is important is that we need to acknowledge that we also don't know a lot of things yet when it comes to AI. So we don't necessarily have all the evidence on what's working, what's not, and the technology is of course changing. So I think it's really challenging because it asks us to bring a more experimental mindset to the question, and a more learning culture, and that's not necessarily something that all institutions are really good at.
Thank you. And in the US, Philipp?
In my work at AXIM, we work mostly with broad access institutions, so community colleges, regional public universities, not necessarily the elites. I would say some similarities and then also a lot of differences to the European context. Well, one is the higher education system is much larger, so many more institutions, and very, very fragmented. So we do not have the kind of more coordinated approach supported by the government to support large networks of institutions as much. That would be more regional, sometimes within a state. I think overall there's still a sense of almost whiplash. So the world around us is changing very, very quickly. Jobs are changing, employers are adopting AI. Every week we read news about new models. I think higher education still feels largely overwhelmed by the pace of change and trying to keep track. Maybe more so than here. I don't get that same sense of whiplash in this community. I would say the students are clearly ahead of the institutions. So adoption among students is much further along than staff and faculty. And there's a growing tension where students are both very critical of AI. So there's an anti-AI sentiment coming from the students where people do not want to build more data centers. They want their institutions to be more thoughtful about AI. And the institutions trying to figure out what to do. And then there's a big gap between different institutions. So in many institutions, I would say it's mostly pilots still. So I'll buy one tool, I'll add one tutor in a class, I'll try out how it works, but it's not coordinated, it's not strategic. And then in other institutions, more the well-resourced institutions, it's highly strategic. Data systems are being upgraded, enterprise agreements with the big technology providers, staff is being trained. They're really thinking about AI as a core capability of the institution for the future. And that gap is widening right now. I think those are some of the bigger trends.
And if we look high level, not diving in just yet, but if you look into your areas where you have visibility, what are some international examples of AI strategy and implementation in higher ed that you consider most instructive right now for also the context in which we're sitting? Johannes, do you want to go? You're so polite. I thought the most eager would want to go. Johannes.
Definitely not me. I think it's a really complex question because basically we don't yet see the results of what kind of components people put in strategy, what works or what doesn't. So it's hard to say. I will try to highlight a few things. In terms of governance, I already said that some institutions are trying to put a bit more contextual layer or integrated layer to it. For example, we have at Budde University that I mentioned, they developed what they call a strategy compass, which is simply 6 pillars, what makes their strategy. And what is interesting in this example is that because they promote a relatively simple framework, which they reuse all the time, they try to kind of also put a common language and a common understanding on how do we talk about AI, what are the different, you can think about AI literacy, you can think about use cases, you think about assessment. So that kind of brings a common language across the institution when it comes to AI, because if you do an AI workshop at the institution and you bring people from different faculties, from different backgrounds, everyone has a different understanding on what are we actually talking about. Also, even here on the panel, I guess, are we talking now about language models? Are we talking broader than language models? Like this kind of base understanding is really important, and this can be done with kind of trying to have an integrated framework we see at some institutions. I think maybe another one is we talked about already AI literacy. And I think there's always this discussion, okay, we all agree that there's some form of AI literacy needed, but we are somehow not, we don't want to be strong enough to say, oh, this is actually mandatory. So we have also, again, this is now one example that I have in my head, but Budde University, they just said, okay, mandatory training for all staff on AI literacy needs to be done until this and this. And I think this kind of maybe gives also an impression, okay, this is really something we need to do now to bring everyone on a base level, and then we can move forward.
And can I ask, just for clarification, you said, of course, AI is a whole field of study just like physics, and we're a little unclear in, how we generally talk about this, what we're talking about. When you talk about these required trainings for everybody, is that usually focused on generative AI as you observe that, or is that much broader and tries to do justice to the term?
I think mostly currently focused on generative AI, even equal sometimes language models, I would say.
And you too? What are the examples, high level, that you consider instructive for, or that we might want to look at?
I mean, I could follow up on what Johannes said, in that we even have similar good examples in Germany when it comes to AI literacy. So perhaps, first of all, many universities already have some kind of guideline or policy papers. Some have a strategy, but when we look at it more closely, they barely indistinguishable. As Johannes said, there is no real vision, but it's more about enabling students, enabling faculty to use AI, and maybe the next step is looking at what comes out of it. But this idea of AI literacy is very important, and as I said, a lot of universities have some kind of program, but I know of two instances. First is Technische Hochschule Nürnberg, who made it mandatory for students to finish a course on AI campus, and they have to be able to show that they have done this. I've just come up with it recently, so I have no more information. And I think RPTU, also Kaiserslautern Landau, has something similar with their own course. So there is this idea of really making AI literacy training mandatory for all people at a university.
And I know, Philipp, you just attended a Chief AI Officer meeting, which I don't know if something like this exists in our region. But from your perspective, what are some interesting things to look at?
I was going to use a different example, but I guess I
go
will
with
talk
yours.
About
but I thought that was very interesting. I always wanted to know what they talk about when they meet.
All right, two sentences about the Chief AI Officers Network, and then I have one other example. So a few weeks ago, Southern New Hampshire University is a very, very large university, 250,000 students in the US with a very large online footprint. They recently appointed a Chief AI Officer, and it's someone who reports to the president, so it's cabinet level position. It's not a CIO, it's not on the academic side. It really coordinates kind of a strategic view of AI across the organization and has significant budget in this case as well. And when he took the job, he was looking, his name is George Siemens, and when George was looking around, he was like, okay, well, what is this job I'm supposed to do? He was looking for examples. It turns out there aren't many examples of chief AI officers in universities, so he said, let me call all my friends who are in similar roles, and let's get together and have a conversation about what does this job look like, how can we be effective, what are some of the difficulties. And so we hosted about 38 of them in Cambridge a few weeks ago. And it was fascinating to hear them talk about some of the strategic challenges that they're navigating, lots of similarities, lots of room to collaborate. And actually my example also is really about collaboration. I think no institution really has the resources to do this by themselves. But there's a lot of opportunity to just work together more. And one of the most inspiring things I have seen in the US is a network of 400 community colleges. Community colleges are a little bit like Fachhochschulen, but actually they also offer 2-year programs, so it's not just 4-year degrees. And they serve a much broader community of students, so anyone who signs up can go to a community college. It's often subsidized or free. And they got together because they were hearing demand from their students who wanted to learn AI skills. And to make it easier to develop these AI programs, they basically formed a network that now has 400 institutions. In just 2 years, it grew from 3 to 400. And they're sharing course materials and program designs with each other so that every institution doesn't have to start from scratch. And the nice side effect, because we do not have a SERF that can coordinate some of this, the nice side effect is that they can now engage with the big tech companies who are leading a lot of the technical work, and they can show up with 400 institutions kind of in their background. And so the conversation with the tech companies is now much more on the same level. And there's kind of a negotiation happening where it's like, okay, what are you offering us? What resources can you bring to our institutions, rather than just being considered a customer who has to pay for access to the services? So I think there's just such power in collaboration and networks, and that's also true in AI.
And I think some of the comments online during the festival have been, can you make this as concrete as possible? And so I want to try do that with you. Can we deep dive into one of the examples that you had in mind and really look at what exactly is transferable in your examples, whether that's infrastructure or a policy or a process for curriculum development? And if a higher education institution in Germany or the German-speaking region wanted to seriously and meaningfully try this out, what would need to be in place? And that may range from technical to legal to cultural, but can we make this real with 3 examples that you brought?
Yes.
Great. Who wants to go first?
I think it would be interesting to start with the network because
I don't even know if that's going to be the example.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting one because that's always the question that I'm getting asked a lot being here. Oh, it's so great to have like something like serve a cooperation of multiple networks. And I know that in Germany there is also on a Bundesländer-Ebene, like there are these networks. So like maybe looking at some success stories there can be a start, and you can start, I can add on.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think the success of this particular network among community colleges was that they focused on a very specific use case. So how do I bring AI skills development into my existing academic programs, and how do I launch new programs specifically for AI skills in my existing academic structure? So that's a problem that many institutions were facing. And where also it's very easy to share what you're building with other institutions because it doesn't require a lot of technology development or investments. It's more, what do you put in your courses? What are the things that the students are supposed to learn, and how do you recognize that in the degrees that you award? So I'd say the first trick is find a problem that many institutions have where it's easy to share the solutions and be as specific as possible, rather than start with this grand vision of we want to be a network, we want to be a community. I think people will participate in the network if the network solves their problem. If it's just about the network, I think it's harder to keep the momentum.
Yes, and I think maybe one thing that comes to mind, so what we do in NPULS is a digital transformation program that is run by SURF, but also the like couples, so something like HK in Germany. And what we also try to bring people together to this really specific problems. And basically, if you look at the questions that universities or institutions in general have at the moment, they're quite similar. So starting with a shared problem and trying to find a answer direction that doesn't have to be the full answer. So like if I'm looking at AI and assessment, there are different ways to deal with it. And I'm not saying, okay, I'm as a network, I have now the answer, but I'm saying, okay, this could be one direction because this worked in this context. And then I think the other point is also copy a lot. Like we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So what we see quite successfully happening is that some institutions might be a bit in the front. That can be in the Netherlands, but it is also internationally. So we have, for example, now adopted one thing that was developed in Sydney University. We transferred that to the local kind of case of vocational schools in the Netherlands. And now within, that is like, I'm speaking of a time period like about half a year. Now around 40 institutions are utilizing that to think about how do we use AI in our assessment practices. So that's kind of like nothing on scratch developed, but just copied. I think this is something that we should accept more.
Actually, can I? Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, yes, I mean, as a Hochschulforum, we are such a network. As you said, the Länder have their own networks, and there are many, many more, which might be another problem on its own. But in our monitor last year, many people said, I want more exchange, I want more networks about basically everything, the policies, didactics, assessment, and so on. So I think I just want to encourage people to simply, outside of the standardized networks as half-day or whatever, to connect, interconnect, and to work together on solutions. And there is right now, open educational resources have their problems on their own, and we talk about them for years now, but it's the first time I really see faculty, people using other people's materials via the AI campus, via other ways, and not only use their own teaching, but really relying on prepared materials for AI education. So yeah, I think there is really something happening right now in Germany as well, but I want to encourage more of this.
Yeah, actually, this reminds me your kind of encouragement to copy and your example from OER. I think one of the reasons why this network that I mentioned has been so successful is it is community colleges. They are not elite institutions. They are much more willing to share because they don't feel like, oh, we are so special, we can't copy from anyone else because we're... So it's funny because I live in Cambridge, where MIT and Harvard are both in Cambridge, and they almost never copy anything from each other because they're so special and it's so unique, and obviously this course will be nothing like my course. And then I see these community colleges who don't have that same ego in a way, and who are just much more willing to share and copy. And when they see something that someone else has developed, they're excited rather than threatened. And so I think that's maybe one of the challenges in building cooperation, that there is a sense of ego and individualism built into higher education, and it might just take a little time to overcome that. And I'm hoping that maybe the OER experience, actually, as people have developed that trust in those relationships, we could actually leverage that community now for these AI developments.
As I was listening to you, I was wondering if there's a different motivation to engage in networks or community. One is, I don't want to feel alone with this massive overwhelm and the pressure. But the other is, as you mentioned, we need to solve concrete, specific problems. Is it a barrier or an issue in itself, as you insinuated, that we have so many different networks, and if we wanted to solve a problem, we would need to be in one? Do we organize well across multiple networks?
I'm just thinking about it because maybe it's having not this motivation to kind of form their own networks or connect with people from other universities. I mean, it's so individualized how people are interconnected between universities, and maybe CIOs, CDOs, I love the idea of a chief AI officer, have their own networks and are interconnected, but maybe the staff for a vice president is not in this kind of network, and they are the ones alone. So we really have to look who isn't in the network, like HAFD or like the Länder Netzwerke. So yeah.
Who's actually charged with building these networks, yes, and do they have the networking power to build them? Yeah. Yes.
I think one thing I want to add is what I'm seeing often in our kind of networks, or when we organize like working groups, there's also a bit of fear of missing out. I would say it's more negative in my opinion, because basically people join because they're thinking, oh yeah, there's something happening, so I need to be part of it, which is on one side good, but if you have then a scale, then it doesn't work because you cannot be involved in all the networks. So then being more specific to the problem helps. But now we're talking about cooperation. Should we go in a specific other example?
Do we feel like we have fleshed out what it needs to transfer this?
I mean, maybe the last thing I would say is it also shows, I think, the importance of face-to-face meetings, because for some of these collaborations, you need trust. You need to know the other person. You know, it's not institution to institution, it's person to person. And so, events like this are incredibly powerful. I think it's also interesting to do the hybrid, because obviously not everyone can be in person in Berlin, but doing this in multiple places. But I think just the importance of building those relationships, we shouldn't skip over that and just say, oh, we're going to define the problems and then everyone wants to participate. Like ultimately it's people who are doing this work.
And you mentioned earlier, I'm taking a question from the chat. You mentioned earlier that there is very polarized reactions or responses, especially from students when it comes to AI adoption or generative AI adoption. Can you share some examples of how students have been involved in shaping AI strategies in institutions across countries? Do you have some of those? All of you. You're all my experts on stage today. If not, that's a problem, right?
I think I can start. I don't know exactly how it's looking in the institutions. I think there is, of course, the usual participation ways. I'm not sure how that is shaped in terms of strategy building and also ways. We do see that students are reacting differently. So I have also talked to vice presidents. They say, oh, I have students protesting against the AI adoption. So that's also happening in the Netherlands on, small institutions, sometimes maybe more art institutions that say, okay, we see different, we want a different way forward for our institutions. I don't think it's structurally integrated yet.
I think, especially in Germany, it's quite different how student participation is part of the DNA of a university. And I hope I don't mix up my universities, but I think Hochschule Rhein-Main started very, very early in 2022 already to set up a participatory process with students and really to think what does it mean now for our university. We have other examples. I can't really, I don't know really which universities, but where they had hackathons with students and to really share this experience of learning about AI in the past years. But I just thought about the numbers in our monitor. There was like, I don't know, student participation was very, very low. So I think it was like 15% or so said, yeah, we involve students.
So I mean, there are lots of examples of students being part of the AI strategy committee, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe one model that's worth considering: San Diego State University has done a student survey, and they did this very early on and shared the survey design online also, so other people could see all the questions, and then they also published all of the results. It was primarily for their own institution, but they also then made it public. And as a result, I think 50 other institutions have now done the same survey with their students. And I think even though, I mean, you might say, well, it's just a survey, but actually I think it also signals to the students that the institution wants to know what students are thinking and doing so that it can then use that in their strategy setting processes. And I think the students recognize that, and at least in San Diego State, the participation of students has gone up over the years, because I think they've seen, okay, here's my, I participated, the university shared back what they heard from us, they took some action because of what we shared. So like you have to earn the trust from the students. But I think that might be one, it's a pretty low, you don't need a lot of resources to just adopt the survey.
Should we move on into another examples? And I keep scanning the chat. Which one's next?
I can share some other examples that I haven't shared before, but
the one that you think would transfer.
Okay.
I'm sorry to push you, but let's be concrete.
I will try. So I think coming from a concrete problem statement is really important. So if you look, okay, what are problems? There are two examples developed. One thing was this, it's called SEXY. So Section University has developed basically a bot to help the students. And this is like this classical example. Okay, students looking for information that can be something on, okay, where do I find the classroom, when is the exams coming out, what do I need to do? So all the information that is basically already available, easily accessed through one chatbot. And I think this is something that we also see already. I know some examples in Germany as well, but I think this is a really concrete problem case which you can easily solve because the information is available structured. And I think this is something where you could basically, again, with the idea of copying, look, okay, which institutions in Germany have already developed that? Is that available open source? What does it take to get that deployed with my kind of knowledge and information of the university? I think this would be something really concrete.
And what would have to be in place that we may not be considering? Like, where are the challenges?
Yeah, I think it depends, of course, a lot on the technical infrastructure. That's some base that needs to be there in terms of, and infrastructure in a broader sense, like not only kind of access to whatever technical aspects are available, but also the capacity to develop something like this and deploy it. Not all universities can do this. So that's makes it, again, an argument for this cooperation approach. But this is one thing that needs to be in place. I think the other one is kind of organizational one. Depends a lot on the use case. This use case is relatively low risk. It's just basically giving a different access point to the information that is available. If you want to run more different types of use case, you of course need to look in your compliance type of roles as well.
Thank you. Let's maybe have another example, unless you've spent yours already, to check for what we can transfer.
Can I join in? Can I mention another one, or have I?
Yeah.
Mine?
No, you haven't spent yours. I'm looking
Okay.
and I'm saying this because I think there's questions accumulating in the chat, and I think it makes more sense to go to them and then figure out who takes it after we've looked at your example.
Okay,
because we
did
wanted
you
to deep dive.
Why don't you go first?
No, I don't really. I don't know. It's hard for me because I'm the one should say
I'll go
if
first
it's transferable.
I'll go first, and then if you have an idea, you share yours. This is an example from a totally different use case. So a lot of universities have a lot of data about their students, how the students are doing, their financial operations, their enrollment data, and often it's very difficult to make use of all of this data because typically a few people it's their job to analyze the data and present results maybe to the president. It takes a long time. Someone articulates a question, someone uses the data, prepares a report, someone has to pay attention to it. With AI tools, you can actually give more people access to this data so that they can generate those insights themselves. And one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this example, because there are two people sitting in the first row here who run an organization called Research Ed that does exactly this and works with institutions to help them make more effective use of their data. And one of the things, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but one of the things that is interesting is previously that required a long process of cleaning the data, preparing someone's statistical analysis, presenting a report, building a dashboard. You can do a lot of that with Claude Code in just a few days now. If you just add all of your existing reports and the data sources you have, of course you have to be very careful, make sure that the results and whatever Claude Code is generating is accurate. But you could make all of this data that you have in your institutions much more useful if you gave more people access to these tools.
Can I jump in on that? Because I think that brings up an interesting point, or two interesting points. I think the one thing is you can build nowadays almost everything, so you need to be more clear on what is the value that you want to add. And I think the other one is, I think we're only scratching on the idea that actually we have really bad data quality in the institutions and data governance. So I think we're really focused a lot on, we want to have this AI and it all going to solve everything. But actually for that, it needs a lot more investment on the data side. And I think a lot of institutions underestimate that.
Yeah, and I think especially in Germany, so many people are afraid of doing this with students' data, and so there's always this kind of fear, I think, in Germany to do something wrong with students' data. And I'm not really aware of please correct me if I'm wrong, of German universities thinking about what you said, more data management and AI. So yeah, maybe in the future.
Let's look at the chat a little bit. And one comment or one perspective that was raised was that we have been talking a lot about technical AI implementation, but that we haven't touched on AI ethical aspects. I think that's always on our mind, but we haven't gone there. And also risks and compliance. And I think this is assumed correctly, must be very different in the EU than in the US. And can you put this in comparison for the audience and how to collaborate with the perception differences?
I mean,
Thoughts?
it touches on this last point. And I mean, just to be clear, US institutions are extremely careful and protective of their student data against, maybe the perceptions in Europe that in America all the data is publicly available and we just give it to the tech companies. That's not the case in higher education at all. So this would, if you are using AI to analyze this data, you would do this within the legal frameworks that exist, the regulatory frameworks that exist. And actually, one of the interesting things that has happened between universities and these big AI companies is that universities have explained to the AI companies how they need to design their products so that those products can actually be used in higher education because there are existing standards and laws around data protection. And I see Patrick there, and I remember actually ASU specifically, when you joined, you had that first agreement with OpenAI, the technical team at ASU spent a lot of time explaining to OpenAI what they were allowed to do and what they were not allowed to do, and that they couldn't just add another feature into their tool that would totally break all the existing laws. So I mean, just to be clear. But I think ethical components of AI, I mean, I think it's a really important topic. We need to ask, what do we want to use this technology for? What are the things we're willing to give up? What are some of the potential negative outcomes? And how do we design systems around this that prevent the worst things from happening? And I think that's why I'm so excited about higher education institutions being more active in that conversation, because I feel like you are at that intersection, or we are at that intersection of society, of learning, of the future of work, of technology, and need to have a strong opinion and a strong voice and representing the students' needs. I think it would be not an ideal outcome to have 3 or 4, in this case, they're all men, CEOs, of these big tech companies making decisions that affect what I think there are already 900 million weekly users of these tools around the world. So, if we think about the impact that these tools could have on society, it's very important to find ways to regulate them, to encourage them to do better, and to only use tools that are in line with our ethical expectations.
Which might be difficult. I mean, I think it's the bigger question of innovation, right? Like if sort of exploitation in one part or in different parts of the world makes possible what we call innovation ecosystems in other parts of the world, like the so-called global north, then I think that it's a bigger question of if we can even be in alignment with our ethics, not touching on the environment and water and surveillance, etc., etc. But I think that's difficult. It poses the question of what do we mean by innovation, and innovation at what cost?
Yeah, and also what do we mean by responsible adoption of AI? Yeah. I think there was a really nice blog post. I don't know the author, but you can look it up on responsible adoption of irresponsible tools. So basically making this idea of AI in first place is maybe not responsible because it exploits a lot of energy, water, what's on. People are exploited in the training process, and then for what? To get maybe a bit better outcome. So I think this is like an interesting discussion. I'm not saying that this is now our opinion on it, but it's something that we need to be aware of what is all behind there. I think on the question, I would distinguish between compliance and this question on responsible adoption and values. So I think compliance in Europe, there's of course just clear legal laws that are in place. The AI Act is one of them, data protection, and these need to be compliant. And of course in the AI Act we see there's still some questions, let's put it that way, on how that will look in practice, also for institutions. So what do we actually need to do when we have high-risk use cases? What does this mean? But that's something we can solve. That's something we have also solved before with the data protection. I think the more difficult part is the question on responsibility or ethics, how you frame it, because basically that's a question on what values do we have, and are these shared values across even like in one country? Because values in itself is like a concept that is really contextual. So I would even say in Europe we probably not can agree on one set of values. What is interesting in the Netherlands, what we have done together with Kennisnet, is like the institution similar to SURF that serves for the primary and secondary education. We have developed what we call a value campus, compass. So that's something where we try to define what are the core values in the education space, and from there we can have a bit nuanced discussion on how do we see this then in practice. Because that's sometimes, you can talk about values, but what does it mean, and how does it influence the decision that you took?
Yeah, and furthermore, the idea or this myth of objectivity of AI and the real bias behind them and the real bias of AI output. Two colleagues of mine have written a wonderful discussion paper recently, and they basically argue, yes, some universities are not creating these models, these tools, but they should at least reflect on the biases, on this output, what really is, how it really presents. And there's this difficulty. On the one hand, universities are not creating these models, but they should have some kind of responsibility how it is used in their institutions.
There's actually a really good framework developed for the K-12 sector, so schools in the US. It's an organization called EdSafe Alliance. It's the SAFE framework. I just looked it up. It's safety, accountability, fairness and transparency, and efficacy. And they are now translating that for the higher education sector as well. And I think that's a good starting point. Maybe one kind of additional note on bias. I also think we need to remember that humans are very biased. We make a lot of decisions today where we are extremely biased. We have biased systems of who gets access to resources. There's unfairness. So I'm all for holding the AI to the highest standards possible. At the same time, I sometimes worry that we are holding it to standards that are much higher than the standards we're holding ourselves to. And I think that we have to kind of find the right balance there.
Speaking of challenges, one question from the chat that has been voted up is, and I quote, "I came late, no apologies necessary, but I would love to know how experiences from professors and institutions in handling and mastering AI challenges can be made accessible." So it goes to your earlier point of how do we share best practices and how do we actually develop similar criteria, solve problems, etc. Where is the marketplace GitHub for AI education?
I think there are some places. I think there's not yet, to my knowledge, not yet one central place where all these questions or all these challenges and answers to them are collected. I think what is interesting to add to this is the question of how effective is that in the local context and how does that then transfer, because basically the experiences are always in a local context. So if one thing works at one university, it doesn't necessarily transfer to another context. But I think there are already these marketplace ideas, and I think we're going to see that more in the future. And as I said, I think the most successful things I'm seeing right now is more the platforms that allow that allow teachers to co-create their solutions themselves, so that you have the ability on a technical thing to really quickly build your own I call it now tools. It can be something like, oh, I have something that helps me in providing feedback to my students on this and this questions. I think that the building blocks and putting them then together, I think that's what we're going to see more in the future.
And I think another problem, of course, is not only institutional, but also disciplines. So, I know physicists use AI differently than someone from German studies, or teachers have to use it differently. So I think there have to be multiple marketplaces for different objectives.
I hope there won't be just one place. I hope there will be many places where people are sharing. In my experience, it's one of the challenges, though, is that professors have very little time, or at least in the US. And so, things that they are looking for things that are easy to implement, that they can adopt right away in their practices, not things that require them to spend a day or two thinking about how to integrate it into the work they're doing. And so I found that even within institutions, sometimes sharing can be quite effective because there are lots of similarities within the faculty, and people also, I think Vince was saying this earlier, actually, you care more about when you see your colleague down the hall and you see what they're doing, you get inspired and you kind of want to keep up. So I think there's also that proximity that can be useful. And then there are places, like there are Git repositories on GitHub, and there's EduGems, and Playlabs.ai in the US is a community of educators that are sharing their kind of recipes for using AI. So I think that there's more, and I think curation and coordination would be helpful.
And speaking about cooperation, just expressing a sentiment from the chat. I quote, when students are asked and advocate for cooperation across institutions, we are oftentimes brushed off by the argument that we can build these types of networks because we're federalized, but what students hear is that their universities don't understand what it takes to be AI first. So the institutions are not acknowledging that it needs that kind of cooperation to be AI first. I don't know what AI first means to this particular person, but wanted to reflect it into the room since it's at the top of my list. If you can, and if you would like to, it leaves a little bit of question for me in terms of what does AI first mean, and why would that be a barrier to actually cooperating across states? So, but I think it's also a critical reflection of organizations saying we have a federal system and that slows us down in terms of collaborating.
Yeah.
Can you fact check that?
I think you have to do this.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, and there is cooperation on the level of the Länder, the federal states, because, for example, in North Rhine-Westphalia, there is a big trend of really trying to have using one system. In Baden-Württemberg as well. There's all this debate about to provide access and infrastructure. So I don't know. Maybe it's just an excuse.
Yeah, and I think maybe to add on that, I would say, first of all, it's like, I understand it's really hard, especially if from a student you're encouraged and you see maybe a broader vision. In my experience, what sometimes helps is to provide concrete examples. So as Jannica just said, like there are these examples where students, institutions are collaborating and they're actually getting more value of it. So maybe having a few of them, I'm not sure if the AfD has that maybe already, but
probably, yeah.
Kind of as a starting talking points for also like a leadership team.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I would say a lot of university leaders are interested in the topic that we see in our networking event in next month. I think, yeah, next month, July. So it's this idea of missing out, but I think still a lot of leadership needs their own AI literacy training. So, and I think cooperations and collaboration in this field should be part of AI literacy, who helps us.
And thank you. And another aspect is always resources. So there's another question, and it might be interesting to really look to your different contexts for that. How do institutions around, the question goes to the United States, but also maybe the Netherlands, find and gather funding for AI roles and AI projects? And where are they saving to spend this money on? So other funding approaches that might be helpful for our context here.
Yeah, I mean, I also invite my American colleagues in the audience to chime in if that's possible, but I would say resources are scarce, so it's not like there's a lot of money just lying around that the US institutions can easily access, especially the broad access institutions we work with. Sometimes they have an IT department that's only one person, and they have a few licenses, and the databases haven't been updated in 15 years. So, the role of philanthropy in the US is much more important than in the US. So a lot of the funding comes from foundations and philanthropy through different channels. Ironically, there is a fair amount of money coming from the federal government at the moment, focused on AI, skills development, and pathways. There are state budgets that institutions can access, so especially the public institutions depend highly on funding from their state, and AI is a priority in many states, up to the kind of the governor of the state, and then aligning with those priorities also provides access to the funds. And then it's prioritization within the institutions. Unfortunately, there are no easy answers. You have to take the money from somewhere. I think some institutions are prioritizing it because they see it as a strategic necessity. They don't actually have a choice not to do something about AI. But it's a million different solutions and a million different ways of making it work, I would say.
I think in the Netherlands, quite similar. It's also not that we can print money, but I think for us, we have, of course, this cooperative model at SURF, but also before it was for the vocational schools, they also had like a called MBO Digital, so that's also a cooperation where they try to put certain questions that are there more on a strategic level together and try to answer them together, do service provision together. So I think this approach saves us for sure some resources. But at the end, you of course also need at the institution some people that can steer that forward. And I think there, yeah, it's about prioritization. It's about also looking at, I think, not always, the answer needs to be not always having one separate person to do that, but it can also be included in roles. So I think it's more a horizontal capability that is touching on research, touching on education. So I think this is also some approach to give that, at different people in the scope of the role that is already there.
Yeah. So we've heard a lot of examples. Thank you for bringing those. I hope that some feel like they could be explored further by all of you in the virtual and in the analog space. If we do a final round now, head, heart, hand, choose one idea or one principle or one practical step that all higher education institutions should consider as they develop their AI strategies this year. One thing. It's your closing statement. No pressure.
I start. I would say really include student voices more. Don't make assumption about how students use AI, want to use AI, because it's so different and it's very much variety in student voices. So do not include one, but many students, and also this idea of not making assumptions. Really have networks within university of administration, faculty, leadership, students, and really, what you said, get one language about AI.
Thank you.
I think for me, the most important thing would be having like a learning mindset, I would call it. So be okay to fail. I think no institution will do like one shot and then that's the strategy and that works. So I think this learning mindset, be okay with trying out different things, learn from it, and make maybe also more visible what are the underlying assumptions, what I'm trying out here. Make clear that this is a agile strategy. I think we need to work on that.
We do.
Jannica picked mine, so
Oh no!
so now I'm struggling. But so maybe coming back to something we talked about earlier, find one thing that you're going to copy from a different institution or a different faculty member.